Is Kirk Cousins a bust? How can he overcome the hump to get a playoff run? And I'm not saying like he did this year. Congrats, you average to below average QB. You got to the playoffs. I'm talking about get to the playoffs, make a deep run, deeper than Dak Prescott. And is Kirk Cousins the reason behind Minnesota's problems? Now, to the last question, he's a problem. He's not the reason. He's not the problem. To our discussion before we started, uh, the defense for Minnesota is a big problem, as you pointed out. Right now, I would almost say that Kirk Cousins is a bust, but he's still young enough to prove otherwise. He really needs a deep run in the playoff. He needs to stay healthy, which I think he usually does for the most part. Right now, I would label him a bust, though, just because he can't prove that, he is a non-bust NFL QB who can be good enough to make somewhat of a deep run. I don't think the possible bust label would be there if Minnesota would have beat New York and made the divisional, but I could be wrong.
Well, the term bust in general is tough, to label because, you have busts that are like Ryan Leaf, or Jamarcus Russell type busts where they were top picks and they absolutely did nothing. And then you have Kirk Cousins as a bust because he hasn't led them far in the playoffs. Kirk Cousins has had a pretty good career. He's obviously way better than the two guys I just mentioned that did not turn out or pan out at all. I think Kirk Cousins is a solid quarterback. When you're saying bust, it's because he's not in that elite level of quarterbacks that can lead a team or even overcome your team playing bad defense to get a victory. That's part of the issue. He's not in the elite level group of quarterbacks, but he's not a bust. He's a solid quarterback that people expect and want more out of because they think he's capable of it. And he hasn't shown it. So I would not label him a bust, but I would not put him in the top half of quarterbacks, or at least the top 10 quarterbacks in the NFL until he can lead a team to a deep run or consistently be able to win bigger games. Can he get over the hump for a playoff run? I think he can do it at Minnesota if their defense improves. And to your point about is Kirk Cousins the read behind Minnesota's problems, the issue is that you look at the Dallas 49ers game. Brock Purdy did not make any mistakes. And all credit to Brock Purdy for being a rookie quarterback, not making mistakes. But he threw for 200 yards and no touchdowns. And they won the game 19-12. Why? Because the 49ers defense, especially when Pollard went down, shut down the Cowboys. Minnesota lost the game to the Giants 31-24. Kirk Cousins threw for almost 300 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks. He didn't make any mistakes. He played a better game than Brock Purdy, but they still lost because Minnesota gave up 4 touchdowns to Daniel Jones, and they made Daniel Jones look like a fantastic quarterback for that one game. Daniel Jones was flawless. He threw for close to 400 yards. He had almost 100 yards rushing. That should not happen. So if you look at it that way, Kirk Cousins is not to blame for this past loss. You could say if Kirk Cousins was an elite quarterback, he could have led them to victory anyway. He didn't, but it's not like he threw 2 picks, like Dak did in this past game, even though one of the picks was not necessarily Dak's fault. And you can maybe make an argument for both, but specifically the tipped one. But still, Kirk Cousins was not the reason they lost. He could have done more to beat the Giants, but their defense has to improve because you cannot give up that many yards to Daniel Jones and the Giants. And I think in general that the Vikings were slightly overrated a little bit because of the fact they won all their games. They literally were 11-0 this season in one-score games. So they found ways to win, and that's awesome. Credit to finding ways to win, but then you make the playoffs and you're in a one-score game and you lose. So you won in the regular season, but that one game that matters, you couldn't get it done. And unfortunately, that's where a lot of quarterbacks and teams are remembered for what you do in the playoffs. Because, I mean, people think of Matt Ryan differently if he beat the Patriots with Brady. But you look at Matt Ryan, he didn't really make mistakes in that game necessarily, but their defense just collapsed in the second half and allowed Brady to come back. You have to have both sides of the ball do their job. I mean, if Peyton Manning, when he was with the Broncos, had Minnesota's defense, he's not winning any Super Bowl. He won the Super Bowl because he didn't make mistakes. He led the team, and their defense was elite. You have to win a Super Bowl with elite defense and a good enough offense. I think that's more important because even if you have a great offense, you could still lose. I mean, look at the Bills-Chiefs. The Bills lost to the Chiefs that one year in overtime because they didn't have the ball last. And it's like Josh Allen was bad. I mean, Josh Allen did not play well in this past postseason just now against the Bengals, but in that game against the Chiefs, he was flawless. Still lost the game because he didn't have the ball last. So it literally also has to come down to defense. You have to have a good defense on a team or you're never going to win it when it matters.
Makes sense. I think if proper things are put in place the proper way, he can get over the playoff hump. I think the potential is there for him to get over the hump. Like I said to begin the segment, I don't think he's the only reason or the reason behind Minnesota's problems. They have so many problems. It's like the one song, I forget who sung it. It was probably Ariana Grande. I got 99 problems, but you ain't one. Yeah. Minnesota got 99 problems. Kirk is one, but he's not the one. But there's potential for Kirk to grow, for the organization to grow, and become a playoff contender. I think the difference between Minnesota with Kirk and Minnesota we've seen in the past is that Case Keenum is not Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins is not Case Keenum. To Will's point, when I brought up about Minnesota having a deep playoff run, then they ran into Nick Foles' Eagles, is that was with Case Keenum, which surprised me. But I mean, when you have moments like the win over New Orleans in New Orleans in overtime, there's something there. For whatever reason, Minnesota doesn't always want to grab a hold and keep a hold of what they have. For example, it came out earlier today on a different segment of Undisputed. Stephon Diggs had a problem with Kirk Cousins and the way the organization was trending, the direction it was going. And now we look at this today compared to when he left Minnesota to go to Buffalo. It makes me think, okay, Stephon was right. As whiny of a baby like T.O. he is, he was right about Minnesota. It's coming out now, and we can go more in depth maybe next week on it. But it's coming out now, and he's saying same thing about Buffalo. Josh Allen ain't it. Let me go over the sidelines, wave my arms around in front of him, and scream and holler at him. But he ain't it, and something is going to happen in Buffalo. He called it in Minnesota. He's trying to call it in Buffalo. The problem is, and I know it's a little off topic, but the problem is, Stephon, you got to stop running away from the problems. Kirk Cousins is a problem for Minnesota. They either need to try to fix the problem or they need to move on. This is a good class to move on if you want to move on from Kirk Cousins. The problem is, Minnesota, to move on from him, you're either going to have to sign someone in UDFA or you're going to have to trade to move up. I think right now the ball is in Kurt's court, and I think depending on the way Minnesota drafts, if they draft a quarterback, they're looking to give Kirk 1, maybe 2 more years. Have the QB sit behind Kirk, learn from Kirk, and then move on. So I think Kirk really needs to prove himself starting now for next year. If he can prove himself and he can keep his job in Minnesota, I don't think he will eventually be a bust. But if he loses the job in Minnesota and he has to move on to another team, then you're looking at a bust. I mean, yes, he's not having a significant moment, people remember him by, like, oh, Mark Sanchez, butt fumble. You're not having one of those, so thank God for that. But yeah, at this point, like I said, ball's in Kirk Cousins' court. His time to shine and prove us wrong. You have one big playoff win over New Orleans Saints when they still had Drew Brees. You're going to need more of those. So you're just going to have to ball out.
Well, I think to your point about the organization, I mean, Minnesota is going to have to understand if they want to win a Super Bowl with Kirk Cousins that they need a better defense. And we've already stressed that point, 1,000 times. They need a better defense because you cannot win playoff games if your defense is giving up 400 yards to a quarterback that's never done that. It's just not going to happen. So they need a better defense. To your point about drafting a quarterback, I mean, they're not going to get a quarterback in this draft where they're drafting from that's going to be capable of coming right in immediately and, is going to be better than Kirk Cousins. That's why they can't move on from him at this point. Obviously, like you said, Kirk Cousins can play a couple years, more years at Minnesota, and then you have your quarterback in waiting if you draft somebody that's more of a developmental quarterback. But, I mean, really, your time to win is now. And even if you don't have Kirk Cousins and you have this new quarterback, a lot of the pieces that you have are going to start aging out, and then they're not going to be good anymore, as good. So it's like you got to win right now. And you're capable of it, but your defense needs to be better. Because, to your point, Kirk Cousins did not make any mistakes in the Giants game. He could have done more, but he did not make mistakes. He didn't throw a costly pick. He didn't fumble the football that cost him the game. He didn't do anything wrong. Could have done more, but he didn't do anything wrong, but they just could not stop the Giants. So in this upcoming year, their defense is going to have to do a better job, and Kirk Cousins potentially could improve a little bit on doing more, and I think you have something there. Because everything else is good enough.
I completely agree, 100%. Well, with that being said, I know we usually go for an hour, but we got a late start due to technical difficulties. So that's going to be it for this week. We will see everybody back here next week, and we hope to hear from you guys. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe to our channels. Definitely leave a comment in the comment section below, and yeah, we'll see you next time. Peace.